Alright, the day has finally come and I'm ready to talk about how to set up a mixing desk in your studio.
I don't need it. I don't.
Now, I got asked this question so many times in the past years of doing this YouTube channel, and I've spent a lot of one-on-one time teaching people how to set up their control desks, and I'm gonna be honest, I just can't do it anymore. I'm hitting that point in my YouTube fame where I just can't spend hours talking to people one-on-one, telling them how to set up their board. It's just not realistic anymore. So this is going to be a broad overview. Thankfully, all modern incarnations of a mixing desk all have the same basic building blocks, so you'll be able to apply everything I talk about today to your desk. It might be a little different, the layout might be slightly different, but no problem, you'll be able to figure out your own way. Now, the first thing I say to everyone when they ask me, when they're having problems with their mixing desk, setting it up, is, did you read the manual? And 99% of the time, they go, manual? What do you mean, read the manual? Read the manual. Read the manual. Read the manual, okay? I'm tired of saying it. You gotta read the manual for your unit. You're gonna learn so much more. I'm tired of reading the manual for you. Read the manual. It's not gonna be able to teach you everything, but especially for the older units, it's going to teach you a lot, really. I really need to stress that. I don't care if I spend a minute talking about how much you need to read the manual. Read the goddamn manual, okay? The next thing is you're gonna need to know really just the basic concepts of three things, which are all really easy to understand. How the input and the output of a unit works, how Patchbays work, and how inserts work. All really three simple concepts. There's a good chance you already know how they work, so you could just skip ahead, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time right now explaining how those three concepts work. Okay, so let's start with just talking about input and outputs and signal flow. This is an extremely simple concept to understand. I'm sure if you're into audio recording already, this is obviously second nature to you, but just so we're all on the same page here, let's just think about regular signal flow. So for example, let's say we have a microphone and you're singing into the microphone, sound's hitting that microphone, that the output of that microphone is going to go to, say, the input of your mixing desk, where that mic level signal is going to be amplified to a line level signal. And let's write out in here. Then you're going to have an output coming out of your mixing desk to your tape machine here. This is the tape machine. Kind of terrible tape machine, but the out of the mixer is going to go to the in of your tape machine. And then once you want to play back that signal or monitor that signal, there's going to be an out on that tape machine that goes back to another in on your mixer where you could listen to the playback from there. Really simple, right? The outs of one piece of gear goes to the in of the other. Really nothing more complicated than that. You want to get used to looking at block diagrams like this. You're going to see these a lot in manuals for mixing desks and other pieces of audio gear where it explains the signal path, not only how you connect pieces of gear to your mixing desk, but also how the signal path flows within your mixing desk itself. In general, in audio gear, the signal path will go from top to bottom, right? So for the example of a channel strip, your signal path starts at the top. Say you're doing a mic signal. You have the microphone preamplifier trim potentiometer up there. From there, it goes to the EQ section. And there, you can send that signal to an aux. You can send that to a monitor section. And then from there, with the fader here, you control, you can't see it on camera, but below here's the fader. From there, you control the output and where you're assigning that output to, right? So generally, it goes from top to bottom. On pieces of gear, generally, it's going to be from left to right. Let's look at this delay right here. We have the input on the left, then it goes to the delay time, then your modulation, the feedback, and then finally, the output. So generally, once again, left to right signal flow path. That's going to be a recurring theme in a lot of audio electronics. Thankfully, in the analog recording realm, The way signals are going to flow to other pieces of gear with inputs and outputs, it's way more intuitive than on a computer. You're talking to someone who has no idea how to use a DAW, and I find it very confusing, whereas I taught myself how to use a tape machine and a mixing desk very easily. It is very intuitive once you start doing it, so hopefully nothing you see here today scares you away. When it comes to input and outputs, you do want to be aware of a couple things. You want to know the difference between a mono and a stereo signal. You want to know the difference between a mic level signal versus a line level signal versus a speaker level signal. You also want to know the difference between an unbalanced versus balanced signal. You want to know the different type of connectors. You got RCA, you got 1/4 inch TS, as well as TRS, as well as sometimes TRRS connectors. Sometimes you're going to see D-sub connectors, and that's more modern equipment and high-ender equipment. You want to know different operating levels. For example, unbalanced connections are -10 dBV, whereas balanced connections are +4 dBm. If you don't understand what that means, don't worry about it. Those are just for the nerds to understand. But you definitely want to know the difference between -10 and +4, because you'll hear people talk about those two operating levels based upon those numbers. They won't necessarily say dBV or dBm, but what they mean is unbalanced versus balanced. In general, if you could find a piece of gear that is balanced, you're going to fare way better in terms of audio fidelity. For reasons that are out of the scope of this video, an unbalanced signal is just more or less lower quality than a balanced signal. Unfortunately for me, and probably you watching this, you're probably working on prosumer gear, possibly Tascam stuff, and a lot of Tascam stuff is unbalanced only. This whole board is unbalanced, except for a few couple outputs here and there, but most of the connections on this board are unbalanced, and that's kind of a sign of a cheaper board compared to a more professional board, which will be balanced. Now let's talk about Patchbays. If your control desk is the heart of your audio engineering, the Patchbays are going to be the veins that allow that heart to pump some blood. This is going to be so useful for you in an analog recording setup. To kind of summarize what Patchbays are, they allow you to centralize all of the connections to your gear in one easy place where you're able to patch different signal flows easily in a centralized location. You can connect all types of gear, all type of connections. There's going to be many variations of different type of connections and different models of Patchbays to do what you need to do. In general, on the rear of the Patchbay is where you're going to have your permanent connection for all of your pieces of gear. So your input and outputs to your compressors, or maybe the in and out of your group outs on your mixing board. I could keep going on. Plenty of gear you could attach to the back of the Patchbay, and then the front is going to be the area where you do all your patching, so to speak. So you'll be able to patch one of the connections to another connection here and so forth. Okay, when it comes to Patchbays, there are going to be 4 main type of Patchbays. Now, for all these diagrams I'm about to draw, imagine this Patchbay, but you're viewing it from the side here. So if I were to draw that, it would look something like this, where this is the back, so we'll put R for rear, and then these are the 2 connections on the front. So generally, especially with a Patchbay like this, these columns here are seen as a unit. So let's just start with the easiest one, open/through Patchbays. In that configuration, this rear connection here is directly connected to the front connection there, and this rear connection here is connected to the front connection there. Very self-explanatory. The back is connected to the front, and this connector is not connected to any other connector on the Patchbay for any other reason. So that is the open/through configuration. Let's draw this again, and this time let's look at a normal Patchbay. And normal Patchbays are very useful. And I would say probably most Patchbays in a recording studio are going to be normal. At least I think. I don't know. Someone who works in a professional studio has to let me know. In this configuration, when this is, again, the rear and the front here, In this configuration, when there is nothing plugged into the front and you have your permanent connections to your back, these two connections are going to be connected like so. So in normal operation, when there's nothing connected to the front board, that signal is basically just bypassing this patch bay. What makes the normal patch bay so powerful is that when you plug something into the front of the patch bay unit, this connection here is severed. And now you could connect a piece of equipment like so. Let me just draw this out here. And this signal path will keep going this way. You could send this to a piece of equipment, let's just say some reverb, and then you could take the output of that reverb, connect it back to the bottom of that patch bay, and that signal flow will go this way. So it basically allows you to interrupt that bypassed connection and put a piece of gear in between. This is going to be so useful. Let's say, for example, you have a tape machine. That's the tape machine, looks like a smiley face. And let's just say the channel 1 signal flow path back to your mixer. This is the mixer here. Let's say you have the output of channel 1 from the tape machine go to that normalized patch base. Let's draw that in real quick. Okay, so I drew in the signal path. You have the output of channel 1 on that tape machine going through that normalized patch bay and routing back to that mixing desk. So in normal mixing operations, you could listen back to channel 1 straight from the tape machine without any issue. Now let's say you wanted to add some reverb or some compressor, whatever the case may be, you could plug in right here to the input of the gear. Let's say it's a reverb for this case, and the output of the reverb will go down here. Now that signal path will flow from the tape machine through the patch bay to the reverb, out the reverb, and then through to your mixing desk. So you effectively added that reverb machine or piece of gear to that signal flow path without much issue. Okay, now let's talk about a half normal patch bay, another really useful tool, a little less common, but useful nonetheless. Now this works very similar to a normal patch bay, but instead of this connection here between the back inputs, the rear inputs, being severed when you connect something to this top input here, that connection is maintained and another connection is sent to the front. Now, if you're wondering why that would be useful, this is incredibly useful if you want to send whatever signal and have a dry and wet signal, right? Because that signal is going to bypass and be a dry signal. And then this signal can be sent to, let's say, a reverb. And then the output signal from there will be the wet signal. Now, this wet signal you cannot connect right back into that normal patch bay, because as soon as you connect something to that bottom port, that connection is severed and you will no longer have a dry signal. You will only be listening to the wet signal. Instead, if you want a dry and wet signal, instead of sending it back to the patch bay, you're going to have to send it back to another port, probably on another piece of patch bay that connects to, say, maybe that patch bay goes to channel 1 back on your mixing desk. So there you go. You would basically have two signals. Sorry, I'm not explaining it that great, but that dry signal would go back to the mixing desk, and that wet signal would also go back to that mixing desk, giving you two signals. This is extremely useful for reverb's a great example when you want a wet signal, dry signal, as well as parallel compression examples, right? I like to do parallel compression on my drums. So for me, it would be great to have that dry signal and then have a compressor here, send my drum tracks through that compressor, and have that compressed track go back to my mixing desk. Then I could have the dry and compressed signal playing at the same exact time without any latency issues, and I could have a parallel compressed drum track. The last type is parallel, and this one, I'm not really sure what the use is. Perhaps someone in the comments could explain what their use of a parallel patch bay would be, but in a parallel patch bay, all four connections are connected. So basically, the signal at one port is going to be the same signal at any of the ports. They're basically connected in parallel. Once again, I'm not really sure how that would be useful in a recording setup, but nonetheless, that is what a parallel patch bay would do. In some cases, you could get a patch bay that allows you to do all 4 settings. For example, on this Behringer Ultra Patch Pro model, you can see the 4 different configurations here. We got parallel, half normaled, normaled, and open. And they have diagrams there to make it really easy for you. And you can see there's a switch here for each column on the patch bay where you could cycle through the 4 different settings. Very cool feature. I really like that. I recommend you getting this type of patch bay. If you're not sure yet, what type of connections you're going to be making and you want to just kind of learn your way, try to get one with switches. It's really useful. Okay, and finally, I want to talk about inserts. And I promise this is the last thing before we can start talking about the actual mixing desk. Inserts are going to be very useful for you when you're getting down to do your mix downs and you want to apply gear to different signal flow paths. In simple terms, an insert is just an access point within your signal flow path. So let's say, your signal flow path is flowing to the right here. And let's say in the middle you have an insert point. Now normally, if you have nothing connected to that insert point, your signal flow path will be uninterrupted. But if you plug something into that insert point, you're able to send that signal, reroute it to a piece of gear, and then you could reroute the output of that gear back to that insert point. And it basically turns that into something that looks like this. And then as soon as you unplug that insert point, this piece of gear is now going to be bypassed. That signal flow is once again going to flow right through. Now, a way for you to kind of think about this is it's extremely similar to how a normal patch bay works. Before I drew the patch bay like this, but what happens if I rotate that 90 degrees and draw that patch bay like so? Where the bottom here is the rear of the patch bay, this is the front of the patch bay. If you have a signal path, when nothing is plugged into that normalized patch bay, it'll be bypassed. And as soon as you plug something in, you can send that signal to a piece of gear, and that signal will flow like so. Basically the same methodology as a normal patch bay. Now, an insert, sometimes they are going to be built into your desk. For example, on this board, there's several insert points. There are insert points for my group outs. So you can insert a piece of gear before your signal goes from your group outs to your piece of recording gear. There's other inserts on these channel strips. So when this channel is receiving signal from, let's say, a tape recorder, I could insert a piece of gear there. There's also inserts on the main mix bus, main stereo mix bus for this mixing recorder, so I could patch in a compressor or an EQ for the main stereo bus. It's going to be really useful when it's built into the machine itself. You can also make your own, and I actually explained a situation earlier when I was describing Patchbays, how this would work. Let's just say you have a tape machine. Once again, smiley face. And let's just say the output of that tape machine goes just to that patch bay like I described before. In normal conditions, this patch bay is going to be bypassed. And then as soon as you want to plug something into that patch bay, you just plug it in like we talked about 1,000 times at this point. And that signal path now is going to go through that piece of gear. Really simple, and you could do that with any signal flow path as long as you have a normal patch bay, a normalized patch bay. So normal patch bays are awesome. Your opportunities are endless and really up to your creative freedom how you want to implement them in your studio. Depending on your piece of gear and board, your insert point might either be unbalanced or balanced. It might also be either 1 jack or 2 jacks. The 2 jacks is obvious. Once again, it's basically the same thing as a normalized patch bay. There's going to be 2 jacks that you could connect to. But for a board like I have that is unbalanced, you will see a 1 jack insert a lot, where basically it's 1 single jack. And the way that works is you plug into that with a TRS plug. So that is, in other words, a stereo plug, 1/4-inch plug, and then that will be split into 2 separate wires. each being a TS plug, a tip sleeve plug instead of a tip ring sleeve. This is only one signal per ground. And basically one is the input, or I guess the better word would be send. One is a send and one is a return. There you go. Very simple. They sell these cables pre-made for you, and they're very easy to implement in your studio. So when it comes to Patchbays, there is going to be a balancing act between flexibility of your signal paths and then complication, right? So you're going to have to do a little balancing acts there. For the extreme side, let's say you want the most flexible setup possible. You could get 20 different Patchbays, each with different configurations, and you can connect every single input and output on your mixing desk as well as your pieces of gear to Patchbays. And from there, you could patch anything the way you want it, right? You could go wild. You could do signal paths that maybe once in a blue moon you might want to do. Now, one, that's going to be more expensive because you need more Patchbays, you need more cables. Two, it allows for more chances of audio signal paths being interrupted. You know, sometimes you have to jiggle these wires, and the quarter-inch jacks sometimes don't make good connections, right? So the more Patchbays you have, the more potential headaches you could get, especially if you're moving around equipment a lot. And the third thing is it's just kind of cumbersome, and you don't necessarily need that much flexibility. Now, there might be some situations where, like, man, I wish I had something patched a certain way so I could do a very specific task. But, you know, in those situations, once again, you gotta have to do a balancing act. It's like, okay, I can still do what I need to do. However, it's gonna be a little more difficult. It's gonna take me a little more time to set up my board the way I wanted to. But ultimately, that's going to be up to you, how much space you have in your studio, and how much prep work you want to do beforehand, and set up your signal flow paths in a logical manner. This way, when you get your studio set up and your recording space ready to track and mix, you know, you're kind of setting yourself up for success in a way. So, you know, use your brain power, think about it. When in doubt and you get confused, always draw it out on a piece of paper like this. It helps you think about this stuff a lot easier when you can draw out and you can physically see where the signal flow path is going to go. Okay, this took way longer than I was expecting. Let's just get into the mixing board now. Splice that in right there. Okay, so you just learned those three concepts. Let's move on. So in today's video, we're going to be showcasing my Tascam M-3500. And this video is also going to function as episode 12 of my setting up an analog recording studio series. You know, so people who've been following along with that series, you know, you're going to see finally how I set up everything. Before we go into the specifics of how I set up all the gear in here and how I connected it, I want to talk about the functionality of this board and likely one of the boards that you have in general, because the way you connect your gear to a board, there's no singular way. There is an infinite amount of ways that you could choose to set up your gear on this board. And the way the manual for this board tells you to set up the board is more attuned for people who are going to be recording live ensembles of multiple people. Whereas me, 90% of the time, it's just me in here doing overdubs, or maybe I have 2 or 3 musicians, including myself, recording here. So my situation is going to be much different than, say, you were setting up your board for a live ensemble, maybe even an orchestra, right? There's plenty of different ways to connect all this stuff. That's why you need to know the basic building blocks, and why Patchbays and inserts, like those basic building blocks, are really crucial to understand, because the gear you have is not going to be the same gear I have. It's not going to be the same room I'm in. It's not going to be the same, you know, I could keep going on and on. There's a lot of variables here. I'm really just teaching you the basics of how the basic functions on your board work and how I applied it to my setup, and then you'll be able to use your mental power and come up with how you want to set up with your studio. And trust me, just come along. We'll go through everything. It's really easy. I know there's like 10,000 buttons on here, so it could be overwhelming for you if you're used to just recording in the box per se, but trust me, it's really simple. I actually think recording on hands-on with the mixing desk is actually way more intuitive than DAW. I have no idea how to use a DAW. This stuff is just intuitive. If you know how to plug in a DVD player or a VCR to a TV, you're going to know how to mix music, okay? It's not that complicated. Let's go over the board and start talking. All right, so we're looking at the board here. Once again, this is a Tascam M-3500. I think this is kind of like a good all-around mixing desk to teach the simple concepts on, because it kind of has all the basic functions. It doesn't have all the functionality of a really expensive professional level control desk, but it has enough for the prosumer, as they would call it, can get around with. And, you know, we're going to, once again, go through everything today. Now, once again, if you're looking at a board like this and you've never used a control desk, all these knobs looks really confusing. When I have someone come in this room who has no idea how to mix music, and they ask me, you know what all those buttons do on that board? Of course I do. It's really not that complicated, right? Especially when you realize that this board in particular is a 32-channel board. So there's 32 strips here, each of those strips being the exact same carbon copies of the next. So really, if you want to learn what's going on with your mixing desk, you can make it really simple just by split up your board into its simplest components. So if we ignore the 32 times of this same channel strip, really all you have on this board is a channel strip, the main stereo bus here, you have your group outs, you have this section here, which I like to call kind of the motherboard section of this board. You have two VU meters that are going to show you the main stereo mix bus levels. And then you have an LED meter up here that corresponds to this channel strip. Now, there are a couple other functionalities and idiosyncrasies to what I'm saying, but we'll get all into that in a second. Let's first focus on the motherboard section. Okay, so we're looking at the main motherboard section here. That's just the name I have for it. That's not the real name for it. And let's start with the control room section here. Now, the control room is ideally where you're doing your mixing, where the board is in that room with your speakers. That's where you're going to do basically all of your engineering, so to speak. And this control room, the signal that you're going to be listening to can either be sent to two sets of speakers, A or B. You know, usually in a professional studio setting, the A monitor speakers will be your main monitor speakers. Your B will be your secondary set of monitor speakers, or maybe they will be a consumer level of speakers, so you could compare your mix on a consumer level of speakers. Sometimes in professional studios, this B set will be in the live room with the ensemble or live band that is tracking, so they could hear the final stereo mix to make sure they like everything that's going on. Here we have the potentiometer that just controls the volume going to those speakers. Here is a mono switch, so you could switch the left and right channels to a mono signal just to make sure there's no issues when summing to mono, because maybe your playback device for the end user might be a mono playback system, so that's really useful. This is a dim switch. This is essentially just lowers the volume of the signal going to your speakers by a specified decibel amount. I don't know the exact amount for this board, but in general, you could go from mixing levels to speaking levels. If someone in the room in the mixing room asks you a question, you could turn this down. It'll lower the volume to speaking levels, and you could converse to them easily. And then when you want to go back to mixing, you could click that really easily. That's really useful. Instead of having to, you know, turn down the level by going like this, like that. Sometimes you want to keep that control room level at a specified level, because you have your monitor speaker set up to a level that you're comfortable with, or a level that you want to mix in your room. So that's basically what that device is. Because I'm usually in here by myself, I don't use that much often. Here are your selectors between what you'll be listening to in your control room. Most of the time, you're going to have this on your stereo mix bus when you're doing your mixing, your tracking, your mix down, everything is mostly you're going to be listening to the stereo mix bus. The other selections here are your 2-track machine. When you're doing your mix downs, you want to listen to what is coming back from your 2-track machine. This is an extension device. This could be a cassette player, another 2-track, really anything that you want to be able to hear a left and right channel from. And then here you have your aux out sends. So 1 through 6 here. And you can see in this section here is the aux master potentiometer. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these aux masters, these are the master volume controls, but you have to keep in mind that each channel is going to have their own aux sends, which we will get to in a second when we get into the specific channels. But let's say you were using your aux 1 for reverb on your tracks, and you have, let's say, these 3 tracks sending to your aux 1, sending some signal here. So these 3 tracks are going to your aux 1, which is then going to your aux 1 master here, where you control the level of all 3 channels. And once again, the selector switch is just so you can listen to that signal before it leaves your board. Once again, I almost always have that on the stereo function. The other controls here in the control room section is the solo potentiometer as well as the PFL, or the pre-fadered listen potentiometer, with this pre-fade listen button here. When this button is not depressed, this control room defaults to the solo setting here, which basically on each channel there's going to be a solo button, as you can see here. When you want to solo a channel, you press the solo button, and depending on the level here, it'll let you listen to that track with its respective panning and EQ and level based upon the fader position that it's at, and you can listen to that track in a solo function. When you press the pre-fade listen button, it essentially allows you to listen to your channel strip before the fader, which you can't really see on the camera right now, before the fader for that channel. And it also does not account for the panning. It'll give you a mono source straight down the middle instead of being, favored to one of the stereo image there. I almost rarely ever use the pre-fade listen. That's really only useful just to make sure there's nothing wrong with the signal coming into your board. Other than that, I almost exclusively use the solo function of the control board. The next thing I want to look at is the studio section here. Now, the studio section usually allows you to send your signal to another set of speakers. As I was saying before, sometimes this B set of speakers goes to the live room where your live band or ensemble is recording. This studio function is also used for that. In this case, you would probably want 2 sets of speakers in your control room to do your mixing and monitoring. And then for the speakers in the live room, you would set it to the studio outputs of this board. And on the studio outputs, you can see there's a button here for control room, CR. And that basically changes the signal going to your studio outs to either your stereo mix bus, or if you click the CR, whatever signal you're listening to in your control room, including solo or pre-fadered listen signals, it'll send that to your studio. Once again, depending on your situation, if you have a live ensemble that you're recording or a live band, that could be really useful for them to hear what you want them to, what the control room is hearing rather than just the stereo mix bus. Here's just another mono signal button, self-explanatory, makes the stereo signal mono. Here's just an on and off button to turn on this section. If you don't want the speakers on in the live room when you're recording, you would turn this off. You'd really only want to turn this on when you want whoever's in that studio room to hear, signal out of those speakers. This is just a volume button for that studio out, volume potentiometer rather. And then here's a headphone section. This headphone section actually controls, let me show you real quick. It controls the headphone jack underneath here. You can see it right there. And once again, the same functionality as the signals that are going to your studio set of speakers. So essentially, when I am doing my mixing or tracking, I could just control the headphone volume very easily with that potentiometer. Let's go over to this meter select section. This merely controls the 2 VU meters that are up there, and it allows you to cycle between your control room, which once again is controlled by this unit here. It allows you just to listen or to meter the stereo signal, and allows you also to meter the studio signal that is controlled by this section. Most of the time I have that on control room because it's just me in here and it's more useful that way. This section here is a tone oscillator, which you could switch between 40 hertz, 100 hertz, 1K hertz, 10K hertz, 16K hertz. And you could turn that on by this function here. This is really useful when you're doing signal tracing of everything that is hooked up to your board, as well as when you're doing a alignment on your tape recorder. So that is very useful, especially in a tape recording studio. Here is just the microphone for your talkback mic, which is controlled by this section here. As you can see, this potentiometer just controls the level of gain that is coming from that microphone. And you see there's a button here that sends, when you press that down, it sends the signal coming from that microphone to your aux 1 through 4. This is useful if you set up your board for your aux 1 through 4s go to headphone outs for people in the live room, so you could talk to the people in the live room very easily and quickly. This slate button here sends a slate tone to whatever's connected to your group outs, which is most likely going to be your tape machine and or recorder. So that's just useful as a slate tone when you're doing fast rewinding and forwarding on your tape machine. And then the talk back button here sends the signal to your studio outs. Once again, useful if you're trying to talk to people in the live room or the studio room. That's just a really easy way to do that. Now let's move over to this section here, which is the effect return section. And let's just focus on one of the channel strips here. This is effect return 1. This is an input on the back of the board that really it could be coming from any piece of unit that you wish. The most obvious way to set up this board, at least for me, is to have your aux 1 signal and your effect return 1 signal be the same signal path. So if you send your aux 1 signal, say, to your reverb or a compressor or whatever in your patch bay, you would send that back to your effect return 1, and it would go to this channel right here. Same thing, logically speaking, when I first set up this board, I had aux 2 go to effect return 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4, etc., etc. You're going to see why when I talk about my specific setup, I actually don't do that, but that's the most obvious way to set up these effect returns. Down here, you have your group assign switches, which I'm going to get into more detail when we talk about one of the channel strips here. But for now, just know that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 buttons here go to the group outs here, 1 through 8. And then there's also an option for left and right, which goes to the stereo mix bus. Here is your panning potentiometer here, a solo button, and a mute button. Keep close attention to these group outs because this is going to be a really important function to understand for all control desks. So once again, we're going to get into that in a second. Let's not worry about that just yet. Okay, so now let's talk about one of these channel strips and explain all of the functionality there. Let's zoom in so you can see what's going on. We're going to start at the top and go to the bottom because that's generally how the signal path for the channel goes. So at the top here, you can see a power button there. That is for the 48-volt phantom power that will go to the mic connection that is connected to the mic input on that channel. Below that, you have a pad switch. It's kind of hard to see. It's hidden behind the mic level potentiometer, but there's a pad switch there that attenuates the microphone signal there. So if you're recording a loud source, such as a snare drum or maybe a really loud guitar amplifier, you might want to click that pad there, and it, reduces the signal coming into the mic level. There in that bright red, you got the mic level signal there where you could adjust the level of the microphone that is connected to that channel very easily. That controls the gain of the preamplifier for that channel strip. Below that, you have the line level potentiometer where you control the line level in coming into that channel strip. Below that, you have the line signal button there. Right now, you can see it's depressed, so we are going to be listening to the line signal coming into that channel. If I depress that, we would now be listening to the mic signal that is connected to the channel strip. And then the button beneath that is the flip switch. This, to put it into simple terms, it's a little complicated, but for the way my board is set up, that changes the signal between the line level signal and the tape in signal coming into the board. So I could switch very easily between, say, the signal coming from my tape recorder by pressing the flip switch, or by depressing it, I could listen to the line level signal, say, coming from my Alesis HG24. The button below that is the high pass filter button, and that just merely is a low end roll off for any lower frequencies that aren't going to be needed for the signal that you're recording. Say if you're doing a vocal track where you don't want any low end rumble coming in from the microphone signal, you would click that. Below that, you have the EQ section with a button right here that turns the EQ section on and off, or rather it bypasses the EQ section. And you can see on this board, there are 4 frequency controls here. Okay, so on the top of this EQ section, in this yellow potentiometer, you have a 10K hertz frequency potentiometer there. Turning it counterclockwise lowers the 10K signal. Turning it clockwise increases the frequencies around that frequency range. Below that, in the green, you have a sweepable high-mid frequency potentiometers. The bottom one here, you could clockwise gives you frequencies down to 420. Clockwise all the way gives you frequencies up to 13K, and in the middle is about 2.2K. So you could kind of sweep what frequency you want to target, and then the top one there either reduces or increases the signal there. Below that, in the blue section here, you have your low-mid, and basically the same concept. The bottom one is to sweep your frequencies from 42K up to 1.3K, and the top one is to increase or decrease the signal there. And on the one on the bottom here is your 100 hertz frequency potentiometer, so you could change your low end there. You know, every board is going to be vastly different. The board I started on only had 2 frequency knobs, and it was a low and high. Being able to have middle frequencies was a great upgrade for me. There are some boards that are extremely intricate when it comes to their frequency controls. Some of them are renowned for their frequency controls, so depending on your board, that is going to be a little different. The section below that is going to be your aux-send section. Okay, so the aux-send section on this board has one potentiometer that controls the signal going through your aux 1 and 3 outs. The second one here controls your aux 2 and 4 outs. You see this button here allows you to control whether or not each potentiometer goes to that respective number. So for example, when that button is not depressed, as it is right now, it is not depressed, these 2 potentiometers control the signal for this channel going to aux 1 and aux 2. If you click that button, that signal now goes to aux 3 and aux 4. This is a kind of a big limitation on this board. Most of the times I'm able to get through it, especially with my new setup on my board, but this can be a hindrance for some. The button below this sends the signal to the monitor section on this board. I'm not going to get too into that. I'll get into a second why I'm not going to get too much into that, but just know that that sends it to the monitor section of the board. And then this button right here that says post, when you click that button, it essentially allows you, if I zoom out here, it essentially makes the fader for that channel affect the levels going through to aux 1, or I'm sorry, the aux outs. So the signals here, you set the levels here by turning the potentiometers to the level you want, and then when that post level is clicked by turning or moving this fader down and up, that is going to also control the signal. Whereas if you turn that post button off, this fader now has no effect on the levels going to those auxes. Depending on the situation, you might want either or. For example, for a regular reverb sound, which aux sends are a great use of, sending your tracks to a reverb unit, that post function is really useful because when you raise the level of a track, you want to send more of that level to your reverb. You want the reverb to be proportional to the level of that track, right? And then when you lower it, you want the reverb level to also lower. If you didn't have that button clicked, when you change the level of that channel, the signal going to your reverb unit is going to be exactly the same. So once again, depending on the situation, I either click that on and off. Below that, you have aux 5 and aux 6. And then mute button here, where it just mutes the signal going to all of the auxes there. Okay, the section below that is the monitor section. And for a couple of reasons, I'm actually not going to get into this section, really, because... So I originally said I wasn't going to talk about the monitor section because it was a little confusing, but in actuality, the function that it plays is actually really simple. I just think implementing it in a modern home recording setup is where it gets confusing. But for the sake of going through this board, I've went over every single other function. I might as well talk about what it does. So basically, this fader here controls how much signal is going to your main stereo bus. And the 3 controls here, you could either have it on input, which allows you to send whatever input is coming into your channel whether that be a mic input, a line input, or your tape input. It will send that signal to your main stereo bus. Or you could do, I believe this is the pre-fader button, which whatever you're listening to on your channel, it will be sent pre your fader. Instead, it'll be using this fader, which will go to the stereo mix bus. And then this is a listens to this channel's respective group output and sends that to the main stereo bus. So you could see only these 8 channels here have that group button. The other rest of them don't have that. That's because these 8 correspond to these 8. So this one here corresponds to, where is it? Group 8. So if I click that, I'm listening to whatever I'm sending to group 8 out, and it will send it to the main stereo bus. This is just a mute button. This is panning for the stereo mix bus. And as I was saying, this doesn't really make sense the way I would think the average person is going to be using this board. This is, once again, going to be more useful in a real recording studio with a live room where the signal paths are going to be a lot more complicated than the way I have it. So I have never had to use this section ever for my mixdowns because the signal on this channel strip that I want to send to my stereo bus, I do not use this section for. I use the main fader, and I use the left and right switch on that channel strip, so now this channel goes to the main stereo bus. Hopefully that makes sense and I didn't confuse you at all. Okay, your group assign switches. Now, once again, this is really crucial for you to understand, so pay attention, okay? Now, every prosumer professional mixing board is going to have some sort of assign switches, at least the ones that I have seen. So you can see there's 5 buttons here. The top one is 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, and then left and right. The left and right button is pretty simple to understand. When you click that button in, that sends whatever signal is in that channel strip, whether that be your tape ins, your line in, your mic in, whatever you're connected to your board, it is sending it to the main stereo master bus on this board, which is controlled by the red fader there for your, oh boy, sorry, bad camera work, for your stereo fader. So that's pretty simple to understand. And then you can see there is the potentiometer here, which controls the panning of that stereo signal. Right down the middle would be a mono source, equal levels to your left and right channels. The other switches are going to control the signal that you are sending to your group outs. Your group outs are going to be controlled by your faders here. You can see 1 through 8 here. These are your 8 group outs, which we'll get a little into further in this video. And you can see that each of these buttons has 2 separate numbers. And for example, let's say you click the first button here, going through 1 and 2. When that pan button is in the middle, it is sending an equal amount of signal to your 1 and 2 group outs. If you pan this to the left, you will see here, it says odd here. It's sending all of the signal to group out 1 and no signal to 2. If you turned it this way, you'd be sending all of your signal to your group out 2. And you could see, you know, there's various levels of signal that you could be sending to those 2 group outs. When you're sending stuff to your group outs, usually you have it in the middle if you want a stereo signal to your group 1 and group 2, or you're going to have it hard panned either way to send that signal solely to 1 or 2, or 3 or 4, or 5 or 6, 7 or 8. You kind of get it. And you can see, you could click multiple buttons down, any configuration that you need, depending on how you have your board set up, where you want to send that signal. You know, you could go through many different iterations there. Below that, you have the solo button, which, once again, either is going to act truly as a solo button, or it's going to act as a pre-fade listen button if you have this pre-fade listen button engaged. And then you also, of course, have your mute here. And then, finally, your fader, which controls the volume going to whatever you're assigning that channel to. So, if you have it to your main stereo bus, this is obviously going to lower that track, make that track louder, and then same thing if you're sending it to any of your group outs. Let's say you're setting it to your group out 1. Let's press the 1, 2 button. Let's pan all the way counterclockwise. And let's say we have this signal connected to your channel 1 on your tape recorder. You could either affect that signal with this fader, or you could affect that signal with this fader, right? Both are going to be in line with that group out. Okay, so that is this channel. In a mixed down setting, let's say you have a 16-track machine. Let's just say you have the first 16 tracks on this board all being sent to your left and right channel switch here. That is all going to be sent to your main stereo fader here, which is controlled here, which you're either monitoring on your control room section here, or maybe you're sending it to your studio monitors. Maybe you're sending it to your 2-track as a mix down. Whatever the case may be, the main stereo master bus is really important because that's kind of the heart of what you're doing when you're mixing, right? It all comes down to that stereo signal. Generally, these group outs are made so that they will be your outputs to whatever machine you are recording onto. Every mixing desk is going to have a different number of group outs, different functionality here and there, but generally that's what they're going to be used for. You can, however, connect the outputs, these group outs, to a patch bay. This way you could use them for all sorts of needs that you may find in your studio. On some of the older vintage units, especially the one that I started on, the assign buttons and the way the stereo mix is a lot more complicated and confusing at first than the way this board is set up. Once again, to send this channel to your left and right stereo channel is just this button right here. But on some boards, like the TAC Model 5 kind of series, they don't have that functionality. And instead, you could assign the signal to the submasters. And instead of having group outs like this board has with the 8-channel group outs, instead that board has subgroups. And once again, you got to read the manual. I'm not going to explain it right now. There's no point of me explaining it right now. You have to read the manual. Once again, if you understand the basic building blocks, you'll be able to figure it out. It might take you a couple times reading through the manual, but I believe in you. You'll be able to do it. These assign buttons are going to become very useful for you when you need to do bounce downs, which of course is going to be more common when you're working with tape machines. Let's say, for example, you're going buck wild and you got 8 microphones on your drum sound. You like exactly where everything's at. You got the EQ set where it's at for each microphone, and you have the panning set where you're at. Let's say you want to do a stereo mix down of these 8 microphones to 2 channels right here. This would be a left and right channel, so you have a stereo signal. The way you would do this would be you would unclick the left and right button on each of the channels, and then you would select the this is what, channel 9 and 10. So channel 9 and 10 would be the 1 and 2 group outs. So we're going to select the 1 and 2 for each channel. And then by doing that, all 8 channels are being sent to your group outs 1 and 2. So you would have them go here. On, let's say, the tape machine, we would record those onto 9 and 10. So we would click those in to record on those 2 channels. And it's as simple as that. Okay, the only thing really left to talk about on this board are these LED meters here. You can see on this board, I have one for each channel strip, and if I zoom in, you can see there's numbers under each. Some of these you could see, like the ones over here, just have numbers per the channel that they are assigned to. But the ones over here, some of them have separate names, like you see these ones here. They have aux 1 through 6, and then here you have groups 1 through 8 here, as well as the number of the channel that each LED meter is, assigned to. Now here you have buttons here where you could change what signal is being shown on that LED meter. Now right now you can see I have the input button depressed for here, so now all of the channels are merely just going to show whatever input signal is coming into that channel. You can see there's another button for aux 1 through 6 and group 1 through 8. So when that button is depressed, for the channels that say group 1 through 8 or aux 1 through 6, it's going to show the signals going out of the board on these channels. And then you have your tape in if you just want to look at your tape in signals. And I'm To be honest, I'm not really sure what that last one is. I think it's just kind of a placeholder. I think that turns off the LED meters. I'm not really sure. I don't think I've ever really clicked it. So that's it. We kind of have to go to the back of the board now because we understand what all these buttons do here. Now we have to see what the connections like are on the back. So let's pull this board out and take a quick look. Okay, so we are looking at the back of my board, and I apologize. It's really hard to kind of film back here, and I know you guys hate when I do handheld footage, so I'm going to try my best not to shake the camera. And obviously there's a lot of wires here, so it's kind of hard to see everything, but just bear with me. I'll try to go everything, and I'll try to keep the camera steady as possible. So let's start in the leftmost section here. Here is just the power cable. Above that, we have the group outs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can see for the group outs, there's 2 outputs for each group. That is useful because you could send it to two different sets of tape recorders, or if you have a 16-track machine, you could send group 1 to track 1 and track 9, track 2 and track 10, and so forth. There's multiple ways you could use that functionality. On this board, those group outs are connected in parallel. They're the exact same signal. Above that, you have the group inserts. You can see here I'm not utilizing that function. I used to, but I found in my setup it's not that useful anymore, so I got rid of that. Below that, let's see if I could get a good view. We have your control room outs for your A set of speakers, as well as your B set of speakers. You can see I'm utilizing both. Next to that, you have your studio out. Next to that, you have your stereo out, which is just your straight stereo signal out. You can see I'm not utilizing that. You have your 2-track in. Once again, I'm not using that functionality because my 2-track machine doesn't have balanced signal. I only have a unbalanced signal, so I'm utilizing the inputs right above that for the extension in. So these 2 are coming from my 2-track machine. Here, if I could show you, here you can see is the stereo insert jacks for these 2 cables right here. This is merely just 2 insert functionalities for your stereo signal, which is really useful for you if you want to add EQ to your stereo mix or a compressor to your stereo mix, maybe even a limiter. That's really useful. As you can see, I'm utilizing that. Below that, you have your stereo out. Once again, is going to be the same signal as your stereo outs here. You can see these are a balanced signal, and this is an unbalanced signal. Once again, I am using the unbalanced functionality of these for my 2-track machine because that machine is not capable of using a balanced signal. Over here, you have your aux outs. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 5 and 6 right there. Those are the aux signals that are controlled by the aux sends on each channel strip and the master section on the motherboard section. And then here are the effect returns. Now, once again, most of the time, most people are going to send your aux 1 to your effect return 1, aux 2 to your effect return 2. For clarification, I say a couple times in this video that the most obvious way to set up these aux masters and these effect returns is to have, say, the aux 1 go to the effect return 1. When I'm saying that, I'm not saying to directly connect the output of aux 1 to the input effect return 1. I'm talking about having some gear in between that signal chain, right? So your aux out would go to a reverb or a compressor, and then it would come back to effect return 1. Really, it's up to you. It is up to the person. Now, that's everything with the kind of the motherboard section, control room section. Now, let's look at the channel strips. Now, once again, this is a 32-channel board, so there's 32 instances of that channel strip. So we only need to look at one. Let's look at one where there's no connections. Okay, so we're looking at channel 24 here. You can see on the bottom there's a mic in input here for a mic level signal. Above that, you have a line in for a line level signal. Above that, you have the tape in input. Once again, that flip switch on the front switches between tape in and the line in and mic in signals. Above that, you have a direct out, which is a signal post fader. So it's basically whatever signal is on that channel after the EQ, after your fader, is going to be a direct signal out. And then above that, you have an insert jack, which is post EQ on this board. So whatever signal is going into that board, your EQ signal, your EQ section will affect the signal, then it'll go to whatever device you have in that insert chain, and then it'll go back to that channel strip. Once again, there's 32 versions of this on this board, so that greatly kind of simplifies everything that's going on here. I know it seems really complicated and there's a lot going on, but really when you break it down into its simple parts, it's really not that much going on. So hopefully I explained it well, and you kind of understood what I was saying. Now, let's get out of here because I am cramped. Okay, so I just pretty roughly explained all the functionality on this board, what all the buttons do, what all the input and outputs are. Now I want to get into how I set up this board. And once again, I'm merely just explaining this just so you get an idea of how it could be done. There's a million ways to do this. You need to use your own brain and mental power to think about it. If you've been watching my Setting Up an Analog Studio series, you know that I've been going through a lot of thinking and planning and changing around for me to come up with the setup that I have right now. And I just started recording in this room with this new setup, and it's likely to change because as I start to, fine-tune my workflow, I'm going to want to change things around. I'm going to want to change signal flow paths. That's just the way it's going to be done. And depending on your creative mindset and the way your brain works, you might want to change. The way I set up the boards isn't necessarily the way you should be setting up the board, especially depending on what type of gear you have and the amount of compressors, if you're recording to a tape recorder or an Alesis HC24, whatever the case is, it's going to be very case dependent. So now, the rest of this video is just going to be me explaining how I set up my board, and I hope you guys find it interesting. I think it's fun, so let's just start talking about it. Okay, unfortunately for you guys, I'm going to have to go handheld for this because I'm going to be moving around a lot to show you various different things, and I'm going to try my darndest best not to shake the camera. If I do start to shake the camera, just yell at me through the screen and I'll stop, okay? So let's start with the microphone inputs coming into this board. The way I set up this board is that I have these 8 channels here, you can see in the white colored faders, set up for my inputs. So 25 through channel 32, I could connect any XLR cable to the XLR inputs here, 9 through 16 here. Each one corresponds to its respective channel, so 9 goes through the first one, 25. And very easily, any microphone I connect to this board is going to be right here. I also have the line level inputs for these channels set up for my preamp. So you can see, I have it written here. I have the MP5.66, M67, my Bogan amplifier, a DI signal, and my Alltech, what do you call this thing? Whatever this thing is, this microphone mixer. Really, the only true amplifier or preamplifier here is the MP5.66. Here's the Shure mixer I have connected to the other channel, the Bogan mixer I have connected to the other channel, and again, the Alltech. So those are my preamp sections, so to speak. So when I want to switch between just a regular mic level input that is going to be amplified by the built-in preamp on this board, and I want to switch that to one of these preamps, all I have to do is go over here, and once this focuses, you can see I can just click on line if I want one of the preamps, or mic. If I want a mic signal, I just depress these. Now, almost all the time, since I'm mostly doing overdubs, I almost always have my microphone connected to either my MP5.66, or I guess I shouldn't say that. If I want some color, I'll connect it to the Shure microphone mixer or my Bogan. But most of the time, for most tracks, I have the MP5.66. I have that dedicated to this channel here. I put it there on the edge there just so it's just easy for me to look at. I almost always use this channel, as I said. It's kind of like my home base, so to speak. And that is right here, so that you can see here, I have that line button pressed. Now the inputs for all these preamps, so to speak, all of the inputs to these units are once again connected to these inputs here, 1 through 8. I don't have them labeled yet, but If you look at the back here, let's move this a little bit. You could see, sorry, you can see this one says Bogan. These two orange ones go to my Alltech mic mixer. These four here go to my M67, and this one here goes to the MP5.66. So I could connect my microphone signals to those channels there, which go to the preamps, which then go to the line level signal on the board. From there, when I'm doing my tracking, all I do is assign whatever group out I want to go to. So for example, let's say for my MP5.66, I want to do a drum track. I like to put that on track 1. There you go. It's already set up for channel 1, or group out 1 rather, and that'll go to the group out 1. Now, on my board, I have these 8 group outs connected to either my tape machine or my Alesis HG24. Now, if you look here, you'll see with a piece of tape, I have different numbers on there. You can see for channel 1, I also have 9 and 17, and so forth. This is because for each of these group 8 outs, they go to multiple inputs. So on my tape machine, since this is a 16-track tape machine, and I only have 8 group outs, each group out accounts for 2 tracks. So 1 and 9, 2 and 10, 3 and 11, and so forth. So obviously that is a limitation, but for me, since I'm mostly recording by myself, at most I'll be recording with 2 other people. I'm never going to be using more than 8 microphones at once. So that's a limitation that I could easily live with. I just have to choose what channel, when I send that signal, you know, let's say, for example, like we said, my drum signal is going through this channel here to group 1, which is going to be sending the signal to channel 1 and 9 on my tape machine. On my recorder, just have to make sure I'm either selecting 1 or 9 and not one or the other. And just make sure I'm recording on the right track. And it's really easy to keep track of that. That's not a big deal at all. Now, for the Alesis HG24, same thing. Since that is a 24-track recorder, you can see each of the 8 goes to 3 separate tracks. 8 times 3 equals 24 tracks. So I just had those numbers there because it's a lot easier for me to remember, or not have to remember which each one goes to. So that's just what those numbers there are for. Okay, so we talked about the inputs coming into my board. We also talked about the outputs going to either my tape recorder or the Alesis HG24 there. Let's talk about these channel strips. Now you can see I kind of have a color-coded system going on here. That's more of an invention on myself. Normally all of these are the same yellow color, but you can see I switched some of the yellow ones here with the gray ones here. This way I can just kind of differentiate myself. It just makes it easier for me to mix because I have 16 channels here corresponding to the tape machine. And these channels here are the extra 8 channels that are recorded to, that are connected to my Alesis HG24. For clarification, I have channel 1 through 16 connected to my tape machine, and I have channels 1 through 24 connected to my Alesis HG24. I don't just have the extra 8 here connected to the HG24. The way I switch between these two machines is very simply by pressing this flip button here on all of the channels when I want to switch which machine I am monitoring. Right now I actually don't have anything connected to 21 to 24, which is why when we were looking at the back, those are empty. Just because I don't have the wires yet. That's literally the only reason these aren't connected to my Alesis HG24. They will be eventually, but right now I have everything connected up to channel 20. So let's just stick with the tape machine for now. So I have 16 channels here. Pretty obvious. Channel 1 goes to channel 1 on the tape machine, and so forth. They're all lined up perfectly. For the first time on this setup, which if you've been following my studio setup series, you will know, I think I talked about this, I set up over here on my rack, which we're going to have to talk a lot about this rack actually. So let's get comfortable. Let's kneel down. Let me move the mic. You know, I really don't feel like doing this, but for the sake of the video, let's get rid of all this stuff. So I remove all that stuff. You'll see why I left those cables in a second. Just in general here, let's just say we got 5 compressors here, the Alesis HT24 here, Patchbays, we have a noise gate here, stereo EQ, a mono graphical EQ, a delay, and then my reverb there. So let's talk about this patch bay real quick here. This is just a straight patch bay. It's not normalized. It's nothing. It's just whatever's connected on the front is connected in the back. So this is kind of the main patching point for this rack. And you can see here I have, this is the noise gate. This is the graphical EQ, my space echo, the stereo EQ. I can keep going on and on. Basically, I have all of my outboard units connected to this stuff. And on this side, I have my compressors. And in the middle here, I have my aux signals. And these are coming directly from my board. So when I send a signal from one of these channels via the aux sends here, it'll send that signal to the aux signal here on this left side. You got aux 1 here, aux 2, aux 3, and aux 4. Now for aux 1 and aux 2, I have returns here that are going to the effect return inputs on my board. So aux 1 and aux 2 go back to here. And you'll notice that for 3 and 4, I didn't utilize those effect returns. And that's merely because I rarely ever use the effect return faders near the motherboard there. The reason I don't like to do that is because the faders, as you can see, are about half the length of the faders on the channel strips. So what I have found is that it is a lot easier for me to send my effects back to the channel strips. And the way I have done it on this board, which is a new setup for me, but I think it is going to be really useful, is using this insert function for channels 17, 18, 19, and 20. And I'll explain why I chose those channels in a second. Before we do that, though, I want to explain this section here. These 2 racks here are all normal patch bays. They're normalized patch bays. So I don't have labels on it yet, but this one on the bottom here, there's 16 channels here. Each one of these corresponds to the exact number channel on my board. So this is channel 1 insert, 2 insert, 3 insert, and so forth up to channel 16. So on my board, the first 16 channels here, the insert for each of those channels goes to those 2 jacks. So in normal operation, when I'm doing my mix downs and I just want to listen to the channel normally without any effect, I don't have anything plugged in. Let's say for channel 1, I wanted to put a compressor on whatever was on channel 1. I would connect to the top one here, which would engage this patch bay to be no longer normalized. I could take the top of that, go to the input of, let's say, the Orban compressor here. The output of the Orban compressor would go to the bottom of this patch bay here, and it'll send it back to my channel 1. So now my channel 1 signal is going from the insert to the compressor back to the insert. And this is the first time I'm using the functionality on this board, so I'm really excited to start using that in my mixing setup because that really changes the functionality quite significantly during my mix downs. Before that, I was only utilizing the aux sends for my outboard gear. I didn't have enough cables to do the insert function, and this severely limits you because you basically only have 4 aux sends in my case, and basically it's just not as good. It is not as versatile as being able to affect each channel individually at ease. Now above that is another normalized patch bay. You can see here I have 29, 30, 31, and 32 channels here, and I'll show you why I have those channels. So the reason I have those channels, 29, 30, 31, 32, is because I am using those as inserts for my preamps. Now this is really useful, say when I'm doing my tracking and I want to add a compressor to my signal before it gets to the tape machine or my Alesis HG24. So for example, if I'm using the MP5.66, using that insert function, if we go back to my rack now, trying not to shake the camera, I could use the insert for that MP5.66, take the input of that insert, go to a compressor, the output of that compressor can go back to the bottom of that insert, and now that compressed signal is going to be controlled by the fader on that channel. So that is why I had the insert set up like that for those 4 channels. Over here, you can see I have the stereo mix bus insert set up, and I almost always have that permanently connected to the CL52E here, which I'm using this top one here. I'm using that as my stereo mix bus compressor, so I almost always have these cables there when I'm doing my normal mixing and tracking. I have an insert for my 2-track machine here, and this is actually not utilizing the insert functionality on my board. There is no insert jack for the 2-track signal. However, you can make your own insert points very easily with a normalized patch bay. I'll draw that out maybe on a piece of paper here so you can see what I'm doing here. But basically, I'm taking the output of my 2-track machine, sending it to this normalized patch bay. In normal conditions, when there's nothing plugged in, it bypasses this patch point and goes back to my board as the extension input for my board. But let's just say when I'm doing my mastering stage, so to speak, I have my mix down, I could send that signal playing from that tape machine to a compressor to do some limiting, or maybe I'll also send it to the stereo EQ here, then to a compressor for limiting. So that's what that is for. This here, the CL252E here inserts, this is serving as a keyed input for the compressor, so I could do some side chain compressing. I've never actually utilized that functionality before. That's a new to me setup, but once again, I'm using this patch bay for my own purpose. That it's not an insert jack for my board. I just made my own insert point for the sidechain functionality of this CL252 here. And then I have these 2 left over just for extras for, I'm sure I'm going to want to change stuff around. So I left those empty for now, but I want to take a second to talk about these because this is really important here. And I want to explain why I chose channel 17, 18, 19, and 20 as insert points here. Now, unlike these jacks, which correspond to the insert points for channel 1 through 16 on my board, these don't actually connect to the insert point on channel 17, 18, 19, and 20 on my board. I actually made my own insert points by taking the output for those channels coming from my Alesis HG24. It's going to the patch bay, which when nothing's plugged in is being bypassed. It's bypassing that, and then the channel straight from my Alesis HG24 is going straight to channel 17, 18, 19, and 20 on my board. So during normal functions, channel 17 through 20 on this Alesis HG24 bypasses this patch bay, and goes to my board. So it'll function normally. Now the reason I chose those is so that when I'm mixing with my tape machine, which only has 16 tracks, that I could use these as effect returns, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so I set up the board as if I was mixing down a 16-track song. So you can see I'm using 16 tracks, channels here, rather, and let's just say I'm using my tape machine right there, using all 16 tracks. Now, in the past, the way I had set up the aux sends for my effects, like mainly reverb, I would send it through, say, aux 1. It would go through the master aux send there. I would send that signal via, sorry, trying not to shake here. I would send that to my patch bay where I could connect it to various equipment, and then it would go back to the effect return over here. And as I stated before, as you notice, these faders are a lot smaller than these faders. So that's one con of using those effect returns. Now, since I made 17, 18, 19, and 20 my own inserts, now what I could do is if I'm sending signals to those aux send outs, the signal can come out of the aux, go to a compressor or a reverb, an equalizer, and then I could send that signal to the bottom jack on the 4 red inserts here, 17 through 20. That bottom insert connects directly to the line in for those channels on my board. And another important thing here is that the ones on the bottom here that I talked about before that are channel 1 through 16, those are post-EQ inserts. So whenever I want to insert a compressor to those channels, those are after the EQ section on my channels. Whereas the insert functions that I made myself, those are pre-EQ. So there's 2 benefits there. One, I have the longer fader, so if I want to send a reverb track, so let's say something like that, I'm able to manipulate that signal a lot more easily and with more finesse. As you know, the larger the faders you have are, the more easier it is to have that fine finesse control to get levels where you want. You will know that even the slightest nudge sometimes can make a track too loud or too soft or just right. So having that extra control is really useful. And then, as I was just stating with the EQ, that insert is now pre-EQ. So that means I can now apply more EQ to whatever effect sends I'm sending back to my board. Before I had this functionality, let's say my reverb was going straight to my effect return 1, there was no way for me to manipulate the EQ. And that is not useful for reverb. It's also not useful for compressing. So now I could send compressed signals or reverb signals through 17 through 20, and I'll be able to apply some EQ to those channels. So that is going to be a huge upgrade for me. And you might be asking, well, what happens when you want to use your Alesis HE24 and you want to utilize those tracks? Well, in that case, I'm going to lose the functionality of being able to use those tracks as effect returns, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Even though this is the first time I am able to set up this machine for 24-track recording, I think I'm most likely going to stick to 16-track recording most of the time. I think 16 tracks is a really good limit for me, and personally, I kind of like that limitation. 24 tracks, I might start getting wild, saying I think we might need to limit myself. But once again, I might change. Who knows? Another thing I want to add to the benefit of having my effect return there is that visually, when I'm doing my mix downs, it's a lot easier for me to keep track of everything when that fader is right next to my other tracks. If that effect return was either over there, or maybe instead of doing 17 to 20, you said, hey, Mario, why didn't you do 21 to 24? That would make more sense. It would make more sense when you're recording with your Alesis HE24 to do it that way. And I agree. However, to me, mentally, it's more useful to have the faders right next to my other 16 tracks, and I want to favor my tape machine. I want to be able to optimize my workflow with this tape machine rather than the Alesis HE24 for no other reason than, I don't know. I like the tape machine a little better, and I want to optimize my workflow. That's all it is. There's a very good chance I'm going to wind up switching those 4 inserts to 21 through 24, but we'll see. We'll see where we're at. I think I kind of went through everything. Let me think of anything else. One of the big limitations with this board is that it is unbalanced signals only. Now, for sonic reasons, that's not great, right? The balanced signal at a plus 4 operating level is much more preferred for a recording studio. However, this benefits me in a couple ways. One, all my Patchbays are unbalanced. And 2, I kind of forgot what 2 was, but there was a second reason. Regardless, the Tascam M-3500, there is an upgrade kit to make the inputs and outputs of this board line level. I'm sorry, balanced rather, +4 balanced signals, but those upgrade kits are very hard to come by, as this board hasn't been manufactured in probably 3 decades. So they're very hard to come by, but that's basically it. I think I kind of went over everything. I'm trying to think of anything else peculiar I have going on with my board. With the current setup I am utilizing both the A and B speaker for the first time on this mixing desk. And I have these new to me monitors here that are going to be my main monitors, my A monitors. And then I have my old monitors up here. These are passive monitors that are controlled by this Pioneer stereo receiver. You know, really I'm just using these right now so I could get used to these new monitors. Ideally, as I was saying earlier in the video, you'd probably want to put some sort of consumer speakers on there so you could listen to the mix on, you know, not another set of monitors, but for now, these will do just fine. Additionally, I am using the studio function here for when I want to rip my stereo mix onto my computer using Audacity. And the way I do that is I have this, you know, just cheapo focus right here. And the 2 outputs of that studio connection, I have 2 balanced signals right here. And I just, you know, connect into the 2 inputs right there. And as simple as that, that is how I rip all my music to a computer. Nothing more fancier than that. It's about as bare bones as you could get. You know, that Focusrite does just what I need it to do. I don't need anything special with that. And, you know, when I want to do the mix, or when I want to rip it to a computer, I just turn on the studio section. I usually have the control room thing clicked in. And then I adjust the trim of the output for those 2 cables going to the Focusrite, and I basically just try to maximize my signal to noise ratio as much as possible with the Focusrite. So normally, you could connect the group outs to your mixing desk to a whole load of different recorders connected in parallel. And right now, as I've stated, I have 8 channels going to this tape machine that covers 2 channels each. And I also have these 8 channels connected to my Alesis HG24 there for all 24 channels. The 8, you know, captures, each group out captures 3 different channels there. Something peculiar, though, with this setup, and I didn't realize it until way too much headache, was that when I connected both the tape recorder and the Alesis HG24 to this board at the same time, when I would record on the Alesis HG24, I was suffering a lot of fidelity issues and distortion with my tracks when I was recording and tracking. And I thought there was something wrong with my machine. Actually, before I bought this, I had an Akai DR16. I still have it. I've been trying to sell it for years. And I replaced it with this one because I thought there was something wrong with that machine. And I had the same problem with this machine as well. It was only until one day I decided to unplug the group out connections to the tape recorder and just have the group outs connected to the Alesis HG24. And the difference was night and day. That fixed the issue. And there must be some sort of impedance matching issue, which when you look at the numbers and the parameters of all 3 pieces of equipment, it shouldn't be an issue. But for whatever reason, it is. So when I record on this Alesis HG24, I cannot have the group outs connected to my tape machine, which is not a big deal. The only reason I would ever need them to do that would be if I wanted to record on the tape machine in the Alesis HG24 at the same time, and I have no use for doing that, so it's not a big deal to me at all. And the way I get around this, instead of having to go behind the board every time now and disconnect the group outs to the tape machine, instead, I'm utilizing this Patchbay here with built-in switches. And the top 8 of these connectors here connects directly to the group outs on my board. And then normally, this Patchbay is normalized, so the signal is bypassed and it goes from the top cables here to the bottom set, which then goes to my tape machine. So when I want to record normally, I don't have to do anything. I just have these on the normaled section, or normaled setting rather. And then when I want to record on my Alesis HG24, all I have to do is come over to these 8 channels here and switch it to its on the open function, which disconnects the top and bottom Patchbay here. And that tape machine is essentially no longer connected to my board. And that is obviously way more easy to do than go behind the machine and take the the wires out. That was obviously a pain in the butt. So kind of a little upgrade and kind of an idiosyncrasy with my setup. Something I should also clarify is I explained before how I have these 8 channels as my inputs to this board. Now you might be wondering, why don't you have the inputs to your board to each individual channel? This way, instead of assigning with the assign switches where your mic signal is going to go via your group outs, you could utilize your individual channel strips for the respective channel on the tape machine or the Alesis HG24. So for example, if I want to record bass guitar on to channel 1 on my tape recorder, I could connect the microphone to the back of channel 1, and then I could use the direct output and go straight to the tape recorder. So I could make all my adjustments, EQ, level, mic trim, and then this channel will go to the tape recorder. Now, this is more than an acceptable setup. The problem with that is that you need a lot more wires. You obviously need now 16 microphone cables instead of having 8 microphone cables, right? So once again, that sort of setup where each channel is connected directly to the tape recorder as an input to the tape recorder, that you're going to see more in a professional recording studio where they have more wires, they have more room for things, they have more patch bays. You know, the setup I have, once again, is more going to be set up for an overdub heavy recording session. And I think that's really it. It's really not as complicated as you would think. And let's turn this camera around. I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, my videos are a little bit of a mess, and I know they're not as polished as other YouTubers out there. But one, I just don't have the time to edit these videos. And two, I know I talk a lot, but I think this stuff is useful. And I've already been told multiple times with setting up an analog recording studio series that all the little details that I've been adding has been really useful for people, and they don't get as much views as a more polished video that I might do, but who gives a crap, right? I really just want to help the true home recordists out there, and if a video like this can help people out, that's all that matters. Let me just do a quick look around, because I'm sure I'm going to turn off the camera and go, I forgot to talk about that. Let me look at my rack. As you can see, let's take a look. I still have a lot of leftover space in the top patch bay there. And obviously that's useful because I might want to add more gear. As you can see, I ran out of room on this rack, so I'm not really sure how it's going to work yet if I do get more gear. I do want to get something other than a VCA compressor. You know, I've been talking about getting a hairball DIY 1176 style compressor for years at this point. If I get that, I'm going to have to make some room, but we'll see. Oh, I know what I did forget to talk about something. I did change something recently for my setup in this new room. Before, I basically had aux 5 and 6 for each channel going to the headphone amplifier out here. You can see this one right here is a headphone amplifier. And, you know, that's useful for when I have friends here and we're doing some live recording. However, I realized that I don't need a stereo signal. So one, the first thing I wanted to change was I don't need both 5 and 6 to go to this headphone amplifier. I could just choose one. So that was my first change. And the second thing was my most used outboard effect is reverb. And if you listen to my music, you know that's very obvious. But even in general, I mean, reverb's the most used effect in music making. So what I did was I set up aux 5 to go through to be connected to the headphone amplifier. So you can see on each channel here, I have aux 5 all set at the same signal. This way, when I'm doing my mixing, live tracking with friends, all of the channels are equally being sent to that headphone amplifier, and they should be getting a relatively even mix of, you know, what I'm hearing in my control room headphones. And then I made aux 6. This connects directly to my reverb unit. So now you can see it's the most accessible of the auxiliary pots. Now it's very easy for me to, on the fly, change how much signal is going from each channel to my reverb unit down here. Right there. You can see this is a stereo reverb unit. It still says aux 6. I had to change that to say aux 6. I'm sorry, it says aux 5. I need to change it to say aux 6. But I'm also utilizing the other channel via the patch bay up here, which is right here. And then luckily for me, this spring reverb unit has a fold back input. So although I have aux 6, which I know this still says aux 5, although I have that directly connected to the input of the second channel of my reverb, there is also a fold back which I connected to this jack right here. So I could also use aux 5 for another effect if I want. This would be, I can connect this jack here directly in the center of the camera to say maybe input of compressor, and I can send all the tracks to a compressor. I'm not sure what the functionality of that will be yet, but it's there nonetheless. And I think that's it. I talked a lot as always. Once again, hopefully you learned something. I had fun. I talked a lot. My voice is gone. As always, it's 10 p.m. and I haven't eaten dinner yet. The things I go through for you people. All right, guys. Kisses. Love ya. See you soon. I would say subscribe, but that would make me gay. Can I say that? Can I say that on YouTube? Is that back? Can you call things gay? I think that's back. I think you could do that now. All right. Oh. Do it, squad!